No, he was. It was in 2006. Was that something that was missing? Yeah, he was in the lake. I was right around the corner. The motion was for
Are you? Good evening. I'd like to open this meeting and welcome you to the Princeton Council meeting of Monday, June 23rd, 2014. Madam Clerk, have we met all the noticing requirements for this meeting?
Yes, Mayor.
Thank you. And please call the roll.
Ms. Howard?
Yes.
Ms. Crummiller? Here. Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mr. Liverman?
Here.
Ms. Butler?
Here.
Mr. Simon?
Here.
And Mayor Lemper.
Here. And now please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right, and we're going to start our meeting tonight with a set of 2 minutes. The first is a set from April 21st. Are there any comments, changes, or corrections to the April 21st minutes? Or is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Liverman, seconded by Ms. Butler. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The April 21st minutes
I have
passed.
to abstain. I wasn't present.
Oh, okay. The passed with Mr. Simon's abstention. And then the minutes of May 12th, there were some changes that were made during the day today, and everybody should have gotten a revised copy. I want to make sure everybody had seen those. And are there any further comments or changes to the May 12th minutes?
Can I ask what the changes were from the version that we had received last week? I just got this very recently and have not had time to review and compare.
Okay.
They were changes that Ms. Crummiller made in regards to some, with the resolution section and the format of the vote on the resolution section.
It was just some
It
wording that was
just
a little
wording,
confusing.
some confusion on the wording. But otherwise, it was clarified and resubmitted to everyone.
Okay.
It didn't change the votes.
That's a good thing. You know, I'm happy to go along with that, but like Patrick, when we get stuff during the day, it's sometimes hard to take a look at it. It would be nice if we had some kind of indication of what the changes were, so we're not trying to go side by side to find what sometimes are really pretty small changes. But thank you.
So noted.
So with that said, is there a motion for the revised May 12th minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Liverman and seconded by Ms. Crummiller. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, those minutes passed unanimously as well. Thank you. And now we'll move on to public comment. And this is a section of the meeting for us to hear from issues that are not on the agenda. So if you want to speak to any of the things that are listed here, I just ask that you wait till those come up, and then I'll make sure there's an opportunity to comment. But the first person to sign up on the sheet was Doug Davis from Meadowbrook, and if it's on, okay, so you'll wait. All right, so the next person then is Isaac Liederman. And sorry, just before you start, if you could try to keep your comments to 3 minutes, too, that would be good. Thank you.
So my name is Isaac Letterman. I'm a rising senior at Princeton University,
and one of the founders and leaders of the Princeton Sustainable Investment Initiative, otherwise known as PSII. As its name suggests, PSII works to have the university invest its endowment in a sustainable fashion. For those of you unfamiliar with the sustainable investment movement, this means we aim to have the university end its investments in the fossil fuel industry. Such a move by the university, we believe, would signal to policymakers around the world that the fossil fuel industry is a moral pariah and that action on climate change is not just warranted, but also encouraged and popular. This relates to the ban on fracking, because if we were to move away from supporting this industry that pollutes our planet as well as our democracy, it makes a great deal of sense not to let it frack our land. That is to say, we have the chance, as soon as the ordinance is put to the agenda, we anticipated it would be on the agenda, and we look forward to seeing it on the agenda in the coming weeks. We have the chance to tell decision makers around the world how little we like an industry, that should we let it come in will surely pollute our air, land, and water. By enacting a ban on fracking, Princeton will leave little doubt about how it feels about gas companies and the rest of the fossil fuel industry. Fracking surely will have terrible effects on our environment. Studies have shown that pumping chemicals underground to free up gas and methane leads to water contamination. It is not surprising, therefore, that in areas where fracking has occurred, residents are able to light their water on fire. And as bad as the water contamination is, air pollution poses an even greater threat to public health. Punching a hole in the ground releases all sorts of toxic gases, which contribute to a number of respiratory illnesses, such as asthma. As someone who has asthma, I can tell you quite honestly that I would not wish it upon anybody. And beyond that, fracking will undoubtedly take away our forests. One study, for instance, forecasts that fracking would lead to to the loss of as much as 495,000 hectares would destroy that many hectares of forest in the Central Appalachian region alone. And when entire forests go, so too do entire ecosystems. And fracking has also been associated with other things outside of environmental harm. Violence, for instance, has accompanied the explosion of fracking in North Dakota, as drug cartels peddling meth, heroin, and cocaine are going to these towns to make a killing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I make an announcement about the there is a fracking ordinance that's in the works. The Environmental Commission has recommended a fracking ordinance. The Food and Water Watch drafted one for us, and we are, our planning director was putting it in the format to be consistent with our other ordinances and looking it over, and we had planned on introducing it at some point, but our planning director is ill, and so that's caused a slight delay, but I want everyone to know that we at least plan to introduce that.
Thank you. The next speaker is Lauren Petrie. Sorry if I'm not getting your name right.
Thank you so much, Lauren Petrie from Food and Water Watch. And my apologies, we were anticipating having the ordinance on the agenda tonight. I did not get the message that it was getting bumped until this afternoon. So I did want to take the time to say thank you so much to the council and to the Environmental Commission for supporting the ordinance. We think that it's, Princeton is poised to become the first municipality in Mercer County to move towards a fracking ban, as we saw New Brunswick and Highland Park become the first to move, and Middlesex County did follow. So we just wanted to say thank you so much for considering the ordinance, for taking the time to get it on the agenda in upcoming weeks, and thank you so much.
Thank you. And Mary Ellen Reno.
It's longer than I intended to speak, but I'm really proud and happy that Princeton is going to be passing that anti-fracking bill, and very proud of you. Thank you.
Thank you. And is there anybody who'd like to speak that didn't sign up?
Good evening. Linda Auerbach, Lytle Street. I just have a question for Mr. Kaiser. We've sort of been told to keep our eyes open, although mine look half asleep most of the time.
last week, I believe it was Wednesday, in the late afternoon, I happened to be at the intersection, I don't have a car, so I was on foot, at the intersection of Witherspoon and Nassau Streets. Coming up Witherspoon Street was a navy blue Yanutzi vehicle, truck. Not one of those big white, the long ones, like the 18-wheeler types, but navy blue, I believe, with red lettering. And I noticed, I was to the rear and to the right of the truck, that there were two what looked like trap doors on the top of the truck, side by side. I didn't see what was on the other side of it. And now, admittedly, it had rained earlier in the day, but it appeared to be constructed as a sealed vehicle, and I'm just letting you know that there was a large amount of liquid coming out of the back of it. So I don't know what the truck was storing or transporting, but I just wanted to let you know that. Okay?
Thank you very much. We'll check into that.
Anybody else? Yeah, Paul?
Good evening, Paul Driscoll, Harris Road. At last week's council meeting, I asked if there was a way to notify the public in advance about upcoming developmental projects so residents would have sufficient time to review a project. Ultimately, this would enable residents to address their concerns and feel they are more actively involved in the process. One of the answers given, which I hadn't previously thought about, was that developers are not required by law to notify the public in advance about intended projects, and that what we really need to do is to tighten the ordinances. And I think it is great that we're having a public meeting on July 14th to openly discuss the ordinances. Several of you spoke last week, and I may not have fully understood the content, so I still have some questions which need clarification. Firstly, no matter how tightly the zoning ordinances are, many applications require variances. An example of this is the one required for the former Merrick site, allowing the installation of 18 transformers now that this development is near completion. Nobody really has time to review the impact. Shouldn't all requirements, such as the need for 18 transformers, be included in the original application? Is there a sure way to provide the public 30 days' notice before a project is being addressed at the planning board? Is it necessary to grant the developer an immediate hearing without providing the public with full 30 days' notice, independently of how the ordinances are written? And on another subject at a previous meeting, I have heard that as a university town we have special needs, such as keeping the Wawa open late at night so that people coming and going will have access to restrooms and other amenities. But these same amenities are also available at Princeton Junction, a much larger station. The suggested opening hours, correct me if I'm wrong, for some of these operations are from 5 a.m. to 2 a.m., which is a time frame that suits the needs of students and travelers, but overlooks the needs of nearby residents. If the university requires a 24-hour convenience store, is it possible to have it built attractively in the center of campus, which would work better for the students? Do we really need to allow a convenience store such as the newly proposed 7-Eleven such extended hours beyond that which is normal? And lastly, aren't the residents in town allowed to have quiet later hours without continuous traffic when people would normally be trying to sleep? So you don't have to answer them all because I know that there are a lot of questions.
Right.
But
thank you. So for there's sort of two categories of questions. So for the first category, in terms of what can we do to make the application process more open to the public, I'm going to actually ask my colleagues Jenny Cromiller and Patrick Simon to take that back to the Advisory Planning District Task Force, because they've been discussing a lot of those issues. They're going to be coming to present to council in July, and I think that's the proper forum to really get into the substance of those questions and what we might be able to do to address those concerns, which I think we all share and would like to try to do the best that we can with that. For the second group of questions about the hours of operation restrictions, that's going to be part of an ordinance that council has talked about introducing. Again, that's likely to come up at one of our July meetings, and when we have the ordinance introduction, that will be a good forum to talk about what those hours should be, what sort of limits, if any, we want to put on. So I'd encourage you to come back for that meeting.
I'll be there. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak? All right, I'm embarrassed. I don't know what Shirley Bishop looks like. She's not here yet. Okay. So we'll then stall by moving on to reports, and when she gets here, somebody wave to me, and we'll get her on. So starting with Ms. Howard, do you have any reports?
Thank you, Mayor. I have two reports from the Public Safety Committee and then one from the Board of Health. The Public Safety Committee met last week, and two things we want to report to the public and to our colleagues. The first is that we have been working, really Nick, Chief Sutter, has been working to improve the format of the crime report. So taking a lot of the feedback you received from council on how to make that more user-friendly. So for example, you won't believe this, it's now in a PDF format, so not scanned. So, and the orientation has been fixed, so it's easier to view electronically. It also includes year-to-year 2014 versus 2013 data, so that you can compare the last 2 years. Data from before that is not available, but it at least gives the year-to-year. It has not, they have not resolved the response time issue in CAD yet, so that's not resolved. But a number of those other issues that were raised by our colleagues have been addressed. So it's not perfect, but it's vastly improved, and Chief Sutter deserves credit for working hard on this. And he's got April and May almost ready, and so he'll be sending those around to us later this week. But our thought at the Public Safety Committee was that actually, in the interest of full transparency, the public would be very interested in seeing these reports. Usually they're buried in the agenda material for a council meeting, so he's going to take the step now of posting those on the police department website as soon as they're available. So they'll be sent to us, but they'll also be publicly available. So I think that will be an exciting way to convey to the public more information about what's happening in the police department. The second report from the Public Safety Committee is just a report on staffing levels at the department. And want to report that there are 51 sworn officers, but 48 currently working because 3 are out on different forms of leave. And it's anticipated that 1 or 2 of those that are currently out will not come back. And so we're at 51, but really lower than 51, and so you know that we have been building a list of potential candidates to hire should we decide to hire, and the department is continuing to work on that list to get it down to a workable group of potential candidates, but we anticipate within the next month coming back to council to discuss whether or not we want to proceed with at least starting the process of hiring, and that is actually a multi-month process. So, and once you hire, they have to go through training, so it's really a long process, but identifying the fact that we are now going to be functionally really below 51 because of several of the people not coming back, and then there are 6 people who are eligible for retirement, and several of them who have indicated they may retire. So anticipating future retirements, we may want to come back and ask council to authorize the moving forward. I'm going to pause if there are any questions there before I move to rabid animals. Anything? Okay. There's been a lot of email traffic about animal control over the last couple days, so I wanted to report to folks on that. Our animal control work has been in transition. When we lacked a full-time health officer, we moved our animal control officer under the jurisdiction of the police department, also figuring that that would provide 24-hour supervision, given a lot of these calls come in overnight. But we now do have an excellent health officer on board who has experience with animal control issues from his time on the Burlington County Health Department. So he's been he's been roped into oversight, and I know, Kathy, today you met with Lieutenant Courier and Jeff Grosser, the two people who have reporting for the animal control officer, to talk about making sure we have the right protocols, because there had been some concern about rabid raccoons, and we want to make sure people know that if there's an animal, a wild animal that's acting at all, showing any signs of sickness, they should call immediately. Rabies is fatal if not treated. And so anytime there is an animal, a wild animal that is exhibiting any signs of sickness, contact the police department or the health officer. The numbers are on the website. That animal will be trapped and sent to the state lab for testing. There are state rules that govern how wild animals can be trapped and moved, but if there's any question of illness, our animal control officer is authorized to trap that animal and send them for testing. And so, and I think maybe you can supplement if I've missed anything, Kathy, but Jeff also mentioned that he's going to be posting more on the website in case there's confusion. Now that it's laid out later and people are outside more at night, people may see wild animals more.
We did. When we met today, we made sure that we went over the protocols for the animal control officer and that everybody was on the same page. And really, Lieutenant Courier and our health officer, Jeff Grosser, had already met on this about a week or two ago, and met with our animal control officer. So I think everybody's on the same page. Sometimes when it comes to wildlife, it's up to the discretion of the animal control officer, and I think we're going to do some continued communication with him so that he knows what his responsibility is. I mean, he knows what his responsibility is, but he has to use his discretion in some cases where an animal might be showing signs of either being rabid or being injured or sick. So, and in those cases, without a doubt, he takes that animal, he traps it, and removes that animal. Our health officer, since being on board, has really worked closely with the police department and the animal control officer to make sure that we're doing all the appropriate protocols. So he is also going to put up on the website this additional information for residents if they have any questions whatsoever on how to handle wildlife that they may come across either in their yards or hopefully not, but in their homes, so that they can know exactly what should be done and how they're to treat it as well. So
terrific. I would just recommend that we put that on the main website, not burying it on the health department's page.
I'll let them know that.
Thank you.
Ms. Grumler?
Yes, I have two reports from the Environmental Commission is working with Sustainable Princeton to talk about environmentally sustainable leaf management, and so they're inviting all the landscapers that they can find to their meeting on July 23rd. So that's pretty exciting. Sustainable Princeton has been compiling a list of all the landscapers, and they're sending out an invitation. So I thought that was. The Shade Tree Commission is working on its a 5-year management plan. We hired a consultant, and he's has the first draft, and we're going to be discussing that at the meeting tomorrow. But it's a 5-year management plan for how we're taking care of the trees, and it's required by the state to be insured and to be certified as I forget what exactly it's certified for, but the main thing is that we can get insurance by doing that. So that's pretty exciting.
Mr. Miller?
No reports.
Mr. Liebman?
Yeah, I guess there's a few reports. One is the Princeton Housing Authority, especially at the Spruce Circle location. We've had a couple complaints in regard to how the recycling project has been. That is that when recycling comes, the maintenance personnel, they pull out the containers to the center of the parking lot, and then the recycling company picks up the containers. Well, the problem has been is when they pull the containers out, there's been a mixture of trash sometimes along with the recycling, and that prevents the recycler from placing the containers on their trucks. So it's been a lot of recycling at times left at Spruce Circle, which is, as you know, basically a senior citizen location, and it looks extremely bad, and it takes up a lot of room. So one of the ideas and what we're going to Princeton Housing Authority will be doing is we'll be having separate containers, separate locations for trash, and separate containers and separate locations for recycling. And hopefully the way that it will be done, we can stop some of the confusion that has been occurring. But we know that when this happens, we do receive phone calls from residents in regard to the recycling being left out. So hopefully that move will help. I'm not going to steal Shirley Bishop's thunder because she's a great person in regard to housing. But the affordable housing meeting, something came up that I thought was very interesting, and that was with my buddy Kate there, Kate Warren, in regard to possibly adding the green list that we have to the affordable housing ordinance in regard to when developers build affordable housing, if they may go over the green list that all other developers go over within the town. So that may be added, and I think it was a great idea. We also have the rehab program that we have in Princeton. We also have that program, and if anyone's interested, we have asked them to contact Christy Peacock in regard to that. So those are the only reports at this time. Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Butler?
Yes. In the 19 days that the community park pool has been open, so far we've had over 18,000 visitors, which is sort of an astonishing number when you consider we've had a couple of days at least that have been complete washouts. The pool membership's just shy of 5,000 as of today. The rec department has been good about keeping the department open on the office is open on the weekends, and they've had heavy foot traffic from residents and lots of praise for being open on the weekends. The summer day camp and teen travel camp begin this Thursday and will run for 8 weeks. The sports camps begin soon. The other upcoming events include family golf outing on July 28th, and community night out, which will be August 5th. The garden plots at Smoyer and Community Park South are sold out, and we're hosting a Little League tournament, the district baseball tournament at Farmview through Wednesday, and we'll be hosting the state tournament in mid-July. So you can go out to Farmview and get your fill of Little League district baseball. There's, I don't think, traffic and transportation, I think, will catch in the other the support of the safe biking and walking to school ordinance. We'll pick that up later. But I am stepping down as the liaison to traffic and transportation because of the meeting schedule. I think I serve 4 o'clock is the Historic Preservation Committee, and I think I've been ducking out of there at 5:15 to make the traffic and transportation meeting and coming straight to the council meeting, and it's been 18 months, and I'm a little bit out of gas, and so they'll be looking for someone else if anyone wants to raise their hand. There's been another change in the Traffic and Transportation Committee, however, and that is that the subcommittee is shifting to be more of a staff meeting. It'll be organized by staff, not led by Traffic and Transportation. And Mr. Kaiser, I would like to remain involved on that committee, and I would suggest, it would be my recommendation, that whoever takes over Traffic and Transportation as the liaison also attend the subcommittee. I do think in that regard, then, that would become a committee that more resembled a committee in the former township that was, I forget what you called it, but
The committee in the former township was the Traffic Safety Committee. So
Correct.
it would resemble the Traffic Safety Committee, which was staff-led, but had elected officials and as well as private citizens as members of that committee as well.
right. So instead of having a standing committee on traffic and transportation, it will be a staff-led committee, and traffic and transportation will be liaison to that. So I think that's a great and appropriate change. Thank you.
No reports.
Okay.
Oh, I had one more.
Yep, Ms. Carmella.
The Ordinance Review Committee, I wanted to tell my colleagues, we're working on noise and parks and recreation this week, and I want to assure you that we are taking any policy decisions. We'll bring them back to you if we identify them in those ordinances, which I anticipate we will.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was going to mention, okay. All right, I have a few reports of my own, and and then we'll go back to our presentation. So the first, I was at a health conference sponsored by Enroll America last week in Washington, D.C., and Princeton was being, as I was being asked to speak on behalf of the programming we've done in Princeton, which is being held up as a national model for informing residents about the new healthcare law and facilitating people getting enrolled. And so I want to thank particularly my colleague Heather Howard for her work on that, and also Jeffrey Grosser from the health department, and Elise Niera. And often we talk about wanting to be a model in the state of New Jersey, and it's really exciting to be recognized as a model for the country. Thank you. More of the clapping goes down there. And earlier today, I was at a press conference in Trenton with Loretta Weinberg and student leaders from Rutgers and other public universities in New Jersey, calling for changes that will make college more affordable and more accessible, and to do something about the college, the student loan debt situation that we have. I don't know if people saw the Sunday New York Times magazine, but they had a cover article about the impact that the amount of debt people are having is having on the housing market, makes it difficult for people to start small businesses, and to even save for retirement. So there's a movement going on in the state right now. I'll be coming back to council probably in September, so there's going to be a resolution that they're going to be asking municipalities to sign on to. Last week I was at JW Middle School. The 8th graders there were presenting their ideas on civic issues, and one of the excellent reports came from Lance's daughter. But I was just really impressed, and all of the topics they picked were things that could have come straight from our agenda. So one was on student loans, one was on wage theft. Another presentation was on discouraging smoking. There was one on healthy school lunches. And to that note, I want to thank the school district. For those who haven't heard, they just switched to a new provider that is promising to produce healthier lunches than the current contractor. So that was a major victory for the school board and for our community. Let's see, Lance Liverman and I met, I think was it last week or the week before, with Kathy Monzo and Bob Breschai and Jackie Nagan, who's with our HR department, talking about what we can do to help diversify our staff through being more creative about how we're advertising job openings here at the municipality, making sure that we're doing local outreach so that everybody in the community knows when we have job openings. And we've also talked about establishing some sort of resolution to have an official policy about how we advertise and how we recruit, and to also reach out to some of the other institutions in town who do major hiring to see if they'd want to do something similar. So this was something that was on our 2014 priorities list for council, and I just want to let people know that's moving along. And finally, there's been a group that's been meeting that has representatives from Sustainable Princeton, from the municipality. Council President Miller and I have been attending, also from the schools and from the library, to talk about how we might collaborate with solar power or with other renewable energy sources. And we're just at the very beginning stages of that, but the group, one of the first things the group is doing is putting together some sort of resolution that each of those different entities can pass, pledging that we're going to try to work together so that we might be more in a better position to take advantage of some of the programming that's out there. And I think I'm going to hold off on staff reports right now because Shirley Bishop is here, and then we'll come back to staff reports after her report. So I'd like to welcome Shirley Bishop, who's our affordable housing consultant, and who can help walk us through what Princeton's new obligation is going to be from the state and what that means.
Thank you for the opportunity to come before the Princeton governing body. It is always a pleasure. Thank you. Before I start, I want to give you a caveat. COA and the COA staff has given no direction on the rules. So the interpretations that you are hearing this evening are Shirley Bishop's interpretation of the proposed rules, but the planning consultants have been meeting, and we have been going back and forth, and there is a level of consensus on what I'm going to present to you. The COA was directed to prepare a methodology that was similar to the second round methodology. COA then published rules June 2nd, and the published rules contained 3 components for establishing affordable housing obligations. The first component is your rehabilitation share, and COA gave Princeton a 151-unit rehabilitation share. The second component is what's known as your, yes?
Excuse me, this is because when I was reading this, I didn't know what exactly that meant, and maybe can you explain that?
Yes, I will.
Okay. I mean, and same with some of the other...
I'm going to explain how each one, what the components are of each one of the numbers.
Okay.
Okay? Well, I'm just going to give you the overview first. Like the rehabilitation share is 151 units. Your unanswered prior round obligation is 0, and I will explain that. And your prospective need obligation is 0, and I will explain that also. First, I'll explain the rehabilitation share. The rehabilitation share is based on, U.S. Census data. There was no interior survey, there was no exterior survey. There are 3 surrogates of deficiency. If a unit is overcrowded, having more than 1.01 persons per room, and was built prior to 1960, that would be one surrogate. The second surrogate would be lacking kitchen facilities, and the third would be lacking plumbing. As a result, COA gave Princeton a 151-unit rehabilitation obligation. Now, if you feel that that number is unrealistic based on the existing housing stock, you can do an exterior survey that COA has in its rules, and the survey is then presented to COA, and then COA manipulates the numbers and comes up with a new number, but it can be lowered.
So what do you mean by surrogate?
That the 3 surrogates that I just said, overcrowding and built before 1960, lacking complete kitchen facilities, or lacking complete plumbing.
Conditions.
Right.
Okay, so in other words, the COA looked at the census and got that information from the census.
Correct.
I think it'd be great if we could get the full report, and then we'll bring it to council for questions, and then we can open it up if anybody from the public would like to speak to.
What you should also know that your rehabilitation obligation runs from July 1st, 2014 until 2024. According to the present interpretation of COA's rules, all of the rehab that you did from, say, 2010 to 2014 would not be credited. And I would suggest that Princeton consider sending comments to COA that we've always relied on the census year for the rehab credits rather than 2014. There is one entirely new component in the methodology, and that's what's known as the buildable limit capacity. The buildable limit capacity is critical as to why Princeton has a 0 unanswered need obligation and a 0 prospective need obligations. What COA did was they divided the state into 5 regions, planning areas. Planning area 1 with designated centers, planning area 1 suburban, planning area 1 urban, planning area 2, and other planning areas. Once they had the planning areas designated and the municipalities in those planning areas, they then broke the state up into 3 regions, north, central, and south. And they added densities for each one of the regions, and they made adjustments. And that is how Princeton wound up with a 0 buildable limit capacity. There is no data in the COA regulations or in the technical appendices on municipal data, and I would also strongly recommend that you do an OPA request for the data, how Princeton COA came up with a 0 buildable limit. So that's the buildable limit, which impacts your unanswered prior round obligation and your prospective need. Your prospective need obligation is from 2014 to 2024, because as you know, the certification is for a 10-year period. In doing COA's calculations, COA came up with a consolidated Princeton prospective need of 211 units. But because of your buildable limit capacity of 0, that 211 was reduced down to 0. If there was no buildable limit capacity, it would be 211. The unanswered prior round obligation runs from 1987 to 1999, and then from 2000 to 2014. The unanswered prior round obligation can be reduced by affordable housing units completed and also by public housing subsidies. I want to thank Christy Peacock for all of the work that she did to bring the former Princeton Township completed housing units into the COA monitoring system, and for Derek Bridger, who also did the Princeton Borough. The numbers that are in the technical appendices are incorrect, but the new numbers have been inputted into the COA tracking and monitoring system. I am happy to report that the former borough completed 157 affordable units, and the former township completed 283 units plus 23 RCAs for a total of 306, and the combined total is 463 affordable units for the consolidated Princeton. You should also know that no rehabilitation is credited as a completed affordable housing unit to reduce the unanswered prior obligation need. And actually, they have a vacant land. Your number was also reduced because of the vacant land adjustment that the former Princeton Borough received. However, COA has an incorrect number because the former Princeton Borough had a 223-unit vacant land adjustment, and they did not give Princeton credit for the 223. But regardless, the 0 buildable limit would bring your numbers down. So what does this mean? This means that as of right, these rules are only proposed. I cannot stress enough, they are only proposed. No one knows what's going to happen. I should tell you that Fair Share Housing Center has already filed a lawsuit in the New Jersey Supreme Court. And as you probably know, the Supreme Court has taken control of all Mount Laurel litigations. So nothing is going to the appellate division. It's going directly to the Supreme Court. And the New Jersey Builders Association is also expected to file a lawsuit shortly. The main thrust of the Fair Share Housing Center motion is that the present regulations and the methodology are not similar to the second round methodology, and that's the crux of the Fair Share Housing Center. I would assume that the New Jersey builders will say that the numbers are too low, but we have to wait and see when they file the motion. Just even though it's not relevant right now to Princeton, for your prospective need of between 2014 and 2024, COA only offers 4 housing options. They offer inclusionary zoning, which is the preferred method of addressing any affordable housing obligation. They offer community residences for the developmentally disabled, municipal construction, or redevelopment. Those are the only 4 options that COA offers municipalities to address the 2014 and 2024 obligation. Interestingly, for the unanswered prior round obligation, you go back to your second round regulations, not any of the proposed third round, the 2004 and 2008. They go all the way back to NJAC 5:93, which is very interesting how they came up with all of these mix and matches. Also, in the prospective need, there is a 10% set-aside requirement, and there are no minimum densities at all. In addition, every site that a municipality has in its plan has to be the focus of an economic feasibility study, which is very detailed and very expensive for the municipalities. And most of the municipalities will be commenting on that particular aspect of the regulations. They don't have a family requirement for prospective need. A lot of the programs are not included, assisted living, market to affordable, et cetera. They only have 4 particular options. As I mentioned before, there is one lawsuit presently filed before the Supreme Court. There will be other lawsuits following. There is a public hearing at the New Jersey Housing and Mortgage Finance Agency on July 2nd. All comments have to be sent to COA electronically by August 1st, and if the rules are effective, they will be effective on November 17th, and the new plans would be due May 15th of 2015. And that's the synopsis for this evening.
Thank you. We promise not to shoot the messenger.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question, more of an overarching question to start it off. So, I think something we're really proud of, both in the history of Princeton Township and the history of Princeton Borough, is that we've had a strong commitment to affordable housing even before the COA rules were on the books, and that, ordinances call for 20% set aside. And, my concern is that if the state is saying that we have no obligation, does that impact our ability to say, well, we still want to build it because that's part of our values and part of the community that we want to have? Or does the fact that the state says, no, you don't have an obligation, leave us open to a challenge for our own ordinances?
That's an excellent question that really should be put in the form of a comment to COA. I'm telling all of my municipal clients, these are proposed rules. You have approvals in place, you have agreements in place, all of those are predicated on rules that were in place, and these are only proposed. Whether or not you can go to 20%, I think that's a municipal decision. Many of the municipalities are very concerned at the 10% set aside. They want a 20%. They want the standard 20% set aside that's been in existence really since COA was founded. And many towns will be commenting on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Ms. Howard?
I'd like to follow up on that one, and maybe, Trishka, we could ask you to weigh in, too, because just to sort of paraphrase, the way I've always thought about it is that the state often sets a floor. Well, the state may set a floor, but we may, because we believe this is a moral obligation, want to go beyond that. And we wouldn't want the state to set a ceiling, and certainly not this administration, given their approach to these issues. And so is there a real risk here that these new rules would preempt our ability to do that? Do we need to comment on this, or should we even be calling attention to that issue? Does that raise other legal questions about whether sometimes it's not advisable to comment and call attention to an issue if you might get the answer you don't like? So I'd love to hear from our lawyer on that.
Well, I think actually the question is a really good one that both of you have posed, and it's not one that I can just give you an off-the-cuff answer to tonight, but I'd like to definitely take it back to the office, discuss it with Edgemere, and formulate, and my other colleagues who do a lot of the affordable housing work, so that we can give you a good response. I think it's an excellent question.
Yep. Ms. Kramer?
So rehabilitation isn't one of the 4 options we have?
No, rehabilitation is a separate component. You have rehabilitation share, unanswered prior round obligation, and prospective need. Each has its own category, its own methodology, and its own regulations.
I see. So what role does the rehabilitation, but we have a 0 obligation.
But not for rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is your existing deficient housing stock occupied by low and moderate income households. You have an existing rehab program that's ongoing in Princeton, and that I'm assuming you will be continuing.
But so the rehab program that we have, we rehabilitate properties and then we put them into our housing program, correct?
Correct, into your housing inventory.
So we identify properties when they're up for sale, and that's what we're talking about here?
No, the household, the occupancy of the household determines income eligibility, not the price of the house. If a household comes to Princeton and qualifies as low and moderate income, and the house has at least one major system in need of replacement or repair, then that family would qualify for a rehab loan. There is a 10-year lien placed on the property. And if the property is sold within the 10 years to an income-eligible household, then the lien is not returned. But I think it's a life lien, is it?
No.
No, it's not?
It's until three things: refi, transfer of the property, or sale.
Okay.
So it's just to make it
Chris, you have to get the mic.
You need the mic.
For the television and for the recording of the meeting that's official, you got to be in the mic.
Just to make Jenny's question really clear, we're not talking about buying in units here. We're talking about homes that are in need of system repairs, like furnaces, hot water heaters, that kind of thing. And so we have a rehab program that does repair those things. COA has given us 151 unit or home obligations. So we have to find 151 homes in Princeton that are low and moderately occupied, low and moderate income occupied, and repair those homes in order to meet this obligation. So these are not homes that we're going to be buying in.
Okay, right. That's something that I wasn't real familiar with.
Yeah, so we've got a rehab program in place.
And how many have we done?
Right now, the township did 53 from 1996 until 2004, and then we did another 47 as a result of the third round. Oh, sorry. We did another 47 as a result of the third round obligation. Now we're being asked to do 151. The borough had an ongoing rehab program. We've got money set aside. You all did that already. And so now we realize that we've got to wait until July 1 in order to receive credit. So we've got one applicant in the works right now going toward a rehab loan, and you all will be asked to approve that loan. The Housing Board has already approved it, and you'll be asked to approve it at your July 14th meeting to start this 151 obligation.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, why don't we is that related? Yeah, but you have to use the mic or you won't be recorded.
Kate Warren, I sit on the Housing Board. The question is, these are only identified as ownership, right? These rehab units, because if it's a rental, then you're talking, if it's a rental and there's a low and moderate income family living within the rental, and we use Affordable Housing Trust Fund monies to rehab that, does that obligate the landlord at that point to enter the affordable housing program and have the deed restriction on that property?
Right. The landlord has to agree.
So we're just looking at ownership. I can't imagine landlords in town wanting to join the program and have their deed restriction for 20 or 30 years. Right?
And when it's
10 years.
When it says lack of sink, toilet, tub, or shower, does that really mean that they have no sink or that it's not working and that we're replacing broken plumbing?
I don't know, but as I always say, it's from the census. Who inputs into the census? The homeowner.
Because it seems like how are we going to find 150 homes of people who don't have a sink?
Well, that's why
doesn't make any sense.
That's why I would recommend an exterior survey to reduce that number to a more realistic level. It just doesn't seem realistic at all.
Right, okay.
Jenny, are you finished?
Sorry, Cheryl.
That's okay.
I looked at the American Community Survey, which is part of the census, and that's where this data came from. I couldn't find any of that data if I keyed in Princeton, I got nothing. If I keyed in 08540, I got some data. And if I keyed in 08542, I got totally different data, but I couldn't find any data related to the criteria or the conditions in those area codes. So I really have no idea where this comes from and how one is going to drive around town and identify properties. I think that ought to come from maybe Bill's department. I mean, he gets into rental units to inspect them. I don't know how else the town is going to be able to identify them, except for overcrowding perhaps, and my guess is that those are mostly rentals.
So if I understand what was said a moment ago, in terms of rehab, the number of 151 came from a housing census.
From the American Community Survey, that's part of the U.S. Census.
Okay. And we're not clear on what criteria were used for determining 151.
Well, it was the three surrogates that I mentioned that gave you that number. The question is the data that they used correct data?
So somewhere in that census, it's implied that there is enough data to determine that there are 151 units in Princeton that lack one of the three criteria that are
Correct.
listed. But we're not sure whether the data is correct.
That is correct. That's why you can do an exterior survey.
Okay. Thank you on that. And in your report, you talk about 100% municipal construction. What does that mean?
That means that that every unit on that particular site is an affordable unit. It's usually through the federal low-income tax credit program, and they're mostly rentals. In fact, they're all only rentals for the federal low-income tax credit program. But that's 100% municipal construction. Generally, if a municipality wants a 100% affordable complex, the town generally donates the land, and then the developer will apply for the federal low-income tax credit program and any other public subsidies that are available.
So that is not what is called an inclusionary development.
That is correct.
That's 100% affordable.
Correct.
And funded by the municipality.
Well, it's actually mostly funded through the federal low-income tax credit program.
And one further question. Your report talks about an economic feasibility study. Very often when a large development comes before the planning board, we're often asked, have you done an economic impact study? And the answer is we're not allowed to do an economic impact study on a development. What is an economic feasibility study as opposed to an economic impact study?
The COA regulations are very specific and very detailed on what they want in an economic feasibility study, going from the number of units, obviously affordable, the price of the market rate units, the price of the affordable units. A market study is required, a fiscal impact study is required. It's very detailed and very, very explicit in the regulations.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can give you a memo on all of the components.
For example, does it look at the impact of a development on the school-age population?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'll double check.
Does it look at the impact of a development on demands for municipal services? Those are issues that are often raised by individuals that come before the planning board in connection with the development, and we've often been told at the planning board that you cannot consider those criteria when you're considering a development.
Actually, they're looking for an assessment of the cost to build market rate units, an assessment of the cost to build affordable units, and an assessment of the cost to build and operate rental units, an assessment of capital markets, an assessment of whether the rate of return is sufficient to attract developers, identification of set-asides and density bonuses, as well as other effective affirmative marketing and zoning devices being used, an analysis of unnecessary cost-generating features, an assessment of market demands for particular housing types, an assessment of how the development will affect the character of the community, and any other factors to consider. But I do not see the impact on services or school-age children.
So in effect, it's a study of the economic feasibility of the development itself. Can the development sustain itself economically?
That is correct.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Great job, as usual. I appreciate it. I just want to say, to keep this in proper perspective, we probably, within the Princeton Housing Authority, Princeton Community Housing, and our Princeton Affordable Housing, we probably have over 1,000 applications for affordable housing. Today we mentioned that we should be at, well, Cole was trying to mention that we should be at a zero number, which seems kind of ludicrous. And I think we just have to ask ourselves here in Princeton, what does it mean not to have correct affordability for people to live here? Affordable housing brings everything from diversity to everything else. Princeton should pat itself on the back for being a forefront leader in affordable housing. So even though COA has maybe numbers that aren't making sense to a lot of us, I think that the majority of people in Princeton and the majority of council members sitting here understand the importance of affordable housing. So whatever numbers that we receive, whatever numbers that come across in November, we're still going to look at, I'm sure, 20% or so affordable housing. I mean, I think that's just correct and what we should be doing. So I appreciate the report, but I also want you to know that there are people that feel that affordable housing is a necessity for Princeton to maintain the town as it is today. So thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Butler?
Well, I want to echo Lance's comments. It's really shocking that I could hardly believe it when I saw it, that they were saying we have a zero obligation, and particularly unanswered from our prior obligation. I'm wondering what our process might be as a governing body. Ms. Bishop has recommended certain course of actions on certain items. I think we'd want to talk to our attorney and give her some time to look at these issues as well. But how we will come together as a group and decide what statements we can agree on that we want to make to COA, what our goals are. I mean, it's certainly, I agree, Lance, it would be great if this 151 is a little bit perplexing. I mean, I think in some respects, I would love to see us rehabbing. I've just spent a lot of time going door to door, and really there are more homes in Princeton than we would like to admit that probably do have a failing system. So, I think some rehab is a positive thing, but it would be great if we could swap some of this positive, some of the rehab obligation for development obligation. But at any rate, I think we need maybe a subcommittee or something to come up with.
Well, my recommendation would be that we'd ask the Affordable Housing Board to come up with a draft response that would then, go, and I think we'd want our municipal attorney to take a look at it, and then we'll make sure we have it on an agenda, council agenda, in July to discuss, and hopefully incorporate some of the comments here. But I think the main one is that we want to make sure we can continue to do what we feel we need to do for our town in terms of having affordable housing and building it, and that when the state says that we don't have an obligation, that's not going to be used against us.
I think I should also tell you that you can use your new construction to address rehabilitation. Yes.
So
you can.
Like Avalon Bay, those 57 units?
Count towards your rehabilitation obligation.
Don't let them start building before July 1st.
July 1st.
Well, but I do think they would need some direction from us, don't you think, as to what they would want to say?
That's part of the conversation, I think, that we're having right now.
I don't understand how Avalon Bay could be used for rehabilitation from what we just heard.
But you can use your new construction units to address your rehabilitation obligation. But you can't do the other. You can't use rehabilitation to address the new construction.
But we have no new construction obligation.
That is correct. I have to tell you that all of the attorneys and planners that I've spoken to has said these are the most complicated rules that COA has ever introduced.
And can you review, just to take a step back, can you review the larger process? So we're supposed to submit our response to this August 1st.
Correct. Comments.
And then what happens from there?
Then there's, COA has 60 days to address the comments. We will never know until November 17th how they address the comments, even what the comments are. But the league has asked that if any comments are sent to COA, to please also copy the league on the comments so that they'll have a complete record.
Okay.
As I said, these are proposed. With the lawsuits that will be filed, no one knows if the Supreme Court will act before the adoption, November 17th, or they'll wait until the adoption. We don't know.
Okay. Mr. Simon, did you have any questions? And we're just sort of going down the line.
Yes. I do want to echo what pretty much all of my colleagues have said about specifically the question on understanding the cap. And I'll simply point out that when Avalon Bay was discussed, the zoning for Avalon Bay was discussed, Borough Council was told that the rules in place at that time placed a cap of 20%, that we could not ask for more. And so if these are going to be interpreted, if these rules are going to be interpreted as placing a cap of 10%, we'd certainly want to know that, and we'd want to comment against that. The rules appear to basically be an attempt to, one, reduce the requirement, at least as it's certainly being played out here, and two, to protect developers even more aggressively than the previous rules already did. The previous rules already required that there were no sort of punitive requirements in terms of cost addition, and this seems to go well beyond that, at least as it's reading out here. I did want to ask for a couple of things. One is, you mentioned, Ms. Bishop, that COA was working with incorrect figures in a few places in there. Could you please update your memo to council with that information?
Correct, yes.
So that we have...
I'm sorry.
So that we have that information.
Right. The COA monitoring was just certified by COA, and the numbers just went into the system, I think, Friday. So, yes, I will update the memo and give you the corrected numbers.
Okay, so and just so I understand, are those going to be the numbers COA will use, that these are incorrect and they know that, or are they incorrect and they don't know that?
They know it because they've been working with Christie and inputting all of the numbers. And in their in the substantive rule, they do say that they did not credit the RCAs to the sending municipalities. They credited the receiving municipalities with the RCA, and that they will also correct any affordable housing completed units count. So this should be corrected. But I'm also concerned that they lowered the vacant land adjustment numbers for the former borough. I mean, the unanswered prior obligation internal numbers should be corrected.
Well, so I would like to see an update with both what COA has acknowledged as their corrections, but also if you believe there are additional corrections. I'd just like to have that information.
Right, but we won't know for sure what the numbers COA will use will be until November 17th.
Okay.
But I can give you the internal numbers now.
That would be helpful. Thank you. The next question I had on this was in the rehabilitation share, they've got a calculation for overcrowding, for plumbing, and incomplete plumbing and incomplete kitchens. Are we also obligated sort of by category within that, or is it simply rehabilitation that fits one of these, whether or not the totals end up counting?
It's just the 151. You don't have to segregate within each one.
Okay. Another question I had was the housing options, just for clear definition.
Mm-hmm.
You've already clearly identified or clearly defined 100% municipal construction. Could you define for the public and for those of us who are new to these issues the other three items: inclusionary zoning, community residence? That one's actually fairly self-explanatory, and then redevelopment.
Redevelopment is
Could you clarify? Okay, so inclusionary zoning, preferred method, what does that mean?
Inclusionary zoning is you have a mix of market rate units and affordable units, and according to the COA proposed rules, the set-aside is 10% for the low and moderate income component.
Okay, so that's what previously had been 20%, and what is 20% in our ordinance?
In your ordinance, correct.
Okay. And then redevelopment, what's the legal requirement there that allows it to be considered?
It's in the municipal, in the statute with the whole redevelopment laws, which I am not an expert on, other than it's very defined and very specific, and it's redevelopment of an existing area or site. That's about as general as I can get.
I think that's all I have right now. You said we're going to get a report back in July with the recommendations for. Now, just to be clear, that is for Princeton's comments with respect to the new regulations.
August 1st.
And then do the new regulations require Princeton to, at some point in the future, file a plan under COA?
Yes. Every municipality will have to file a third round. If these become adopted and effective, every municipality will have to file a third round plan by May 15th of next year.
Thank you.
Okay.
Right. This is the third iteration of the third round rules.
Right. Okay. Mr. Miller?
I want to thank you for an excellent presentation. I have one further question, and that is, this is likely to be litigated over a long period of time before it really becomes clear as a requirement. What are our guidelines? What do we live by during the period while these third round requirements are being litigated?
Continue to do business as usual. Just proceed with all of the standard business that you're conducting now, because I can't stress enough, they're proposed. The housing advocates and the builders think the numbers are far too low. Another component believes that the methodology, this third round, third iteration, is not similar to the second round methodology. And that's actually the core of Fair Share Housing Center's motion, that it is not similar to the second round methodology. And I'm sure that there'll be others that will also be filing lawsuits. And the only thing I can say is it's as if they weren't proposed at the moment, because they're not in effect. They're there for your review and comment.
But, okay.
Thank you.
Butler?
It doesn't seem to me we can quite do business as usual, because we would want to be, it does take a very long time, we would want to be preparing for this outcome.
The outcome right now for Princeton is a rehab obligation.
Right. But if our development, if we can meet that requirement through development, we would want to continue to ask developers for the 20% set aside.
The 10% is only proposed.
Okay. Are there members of the Housing Board or other members of the public who want to comment on this? No? Okay. Well, yeah.
Christy Peacock. The program as it is now includes both home ownership as well as rental. The rental component has been obliterated completely. There is no rental, what shall we say, requirement or capacity at all. And we've got now, Shirley mentioned, or Lance mentioned, 1,000. We've got over 2,000 people on the wait lists for rental housing. So the need is strong for both rental and home ownership, and I can't stress that enough. When you talk about doing business as usual, we've got a 20% set aside in place. We've got a rental component that does need, and we're going to have new units being built. Copperwood, Merwick, Stanworth, or Merwick is being a huge success. We've got Avalon coming online. So if you keep on thinking about what is available, what is possible, what can be thought of as visionary for Princeton. Princeton has always been considered a role model in terms of affordable housing. Griggs Farm was the first, and to this day is still the only 50% market, 50% affordable in the state. It is used as a role model at Rutgers. People from the university, kids from the university come and do studies on Princeton's affordable housing. We've got a great program. Keep it up, you guys. It is wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Linda, for a brief comment.
May I ask a question of Ms. Peacock? When you say 2,000 people are on the waiting list, do you mean 2,000 individuals, for example, 2,000 applications, or say 1,000 applications, one of which may include 4 family members, 6 family members. Can you explain that a bit? Thank you.
Thanks. We've got 1,500 applications on the list and 2,000 people within that 1,500.
Thank you. And then I just want to get a nod that it's okay for the Affordable Housing Board to take a first crack at this. Are you guys willing to do that? It seems like the proper place for that. And if people are interested, the meeting's July 8th.
Yeah, I would just suggest if any of my council members have any comments, they were mentioning earlier that they could forward them to Christy Peacock. I think that would be helpful also. We do meet July 8th, and yeah, and I think that would be the way to go. And Christy works with Ed. They work very, very well together from Princeton Community Housing. And I think that that's the direction that we can go. We can go so we can have something lined up to propose for August.
Right. We have a council meeting on July 28th. Is that pushing it too close to the limit? I think that gives us plenty of time. So we'll have the letter back here on the 28th, and we'll have the final okay from council if there's anything people wanted to add to it or not.
Most comments arrive on August 1st.
Okay.
Is it a comment system that citizens can comment as well? And so we could also go as individuals and comment, I'm sure.
Okay.
And any members, supportive members in this room or in
That'd be great if we could get that up on the municipal website. Also, if you want to send me, if there's a link to that for online commenting.
I'll send you the information for the format.
Okay.
For the comments, yes.
Yep, Mayor Floyd.
Thank you very much, Mayor. It's been a long time since we introduced Princeton Community Housing, 1969, first unit built 1975, and I say this proudly, without COLA. We didn't even know what COLA was. Wasn't any such thing. Princeton, the community, saw fit to build affordable housing. When we talk numbers, it's really numbers in disguise. You know it as well as I do. You talked earlier about ordinance modification, and you know right now we do not comply with our zoning ordinance, our health ordinances, with the overcrowding. The numbers, I have no idea, but I know all of those kids don't drink Corona beer. The point I'm trying to make is I would urge you to start tomorrow and use folk in the community as well as your experts to really plan to try to include affordable in your thinking. It leads to our diversity, and I hope when you hire new police, it's going to be some diversity. It leads to a better community, in my opinion. And I know we had the comments objecting to supporting the ne'er-do-wells back in 1969 when I had the privilege of being part of the introduction of a resolution for affordable housing. Out of that resolution came the construction of Princeton Community Village up on Bunn Drive. We were never supposed to build there because you never blast your way through the rocks. It's interesting how Copperwood right down the way is building very well. And so did we build. I urge you to put this first on your agenda. Look at your ordinances. There are many more people who need housing. Many more. I don't like the term undocumented, but there are people we don't even know about. Our merchants know about them because they hire them at those wages which are pitiful. I urge you, tomorrow, get your group together and let's start thinking about putting more affordable housing units in Princeton. I don't think there's a cap. You can go 30% if you choose. You better say yes. I've done my research as well. I urge you to think in terms of shelter for those who really need it. As Ms. recent candidate said, she went door to door. I'm sure everyone in the House didn't answer the door. They couldn't. They sleep and work in shifts. I urge you, let's be good citizens, our brothers and sisters keepers, and let's think about affordable housing. More of it in Princeton. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak? Okay, all right. Thank you, and thank you to the Affordable Housing Board for taking this on, and we'll have you all back on, what day did I say, July 28th. And can I get a show of hands of how many people here for the 59 Meadowbrook Ordinance? Okay. Given there's so many people, I'm inclined to push that up on the agenda. So I think we'll hold off on the reports. We'll go to that ordinance introduction, and then we'll pick up on the agenda. And because I live in that neighborhood, I am recusing myself from this discussion, and I'm going to turn the meeting over to Mr. Miller to lead.
At this point, the subject before us is an ordinance authorizing Princeton to acquire Block 5701, Lot 16, Princeton tax map for the sum of $625,000, utilizing funds from the New Jersey Office of Emergency Management FEMA grant program, project number RFC-PJ-02-NJ-2011-01, and from the Municipal Open Space Trust Fund. I'd like to start the discussion of this proposed ordinance by asking our municipal engineer, Bob Kaiser, to fill us in on the history of this particular Block 5701, Lot 16, and how we got to where we are today. Bob, can you do that, please?
Thank you very much, Council President Miller. As I went through the file today, I was really quite surprised as to the extensive history of this property. Goes back to 2002 when there was a significant flood event. At that time, the property had flooded, and residents came to the former Princeton Township Committee meeting asking for consideration as to what could be done. And as a result, the municipality applied for a grant from the New Jersey Office of Emergency Management to prepare a flood mitigation plan, because we learned that a flood mitigation plan had to be approved and in place in order to apply for FEMA funding, to obtain funding to purchase this property. So as a result, we applied for a grant in 2003, and we were awarded a grant and provided for the Natural Resources Conservation Service of the USDA to work with us to prepare the flood mitigation plan. This is a cover sheet of it. It's 135 pages or so, reviewing flooding experience in Princeton. But as you go through the plan, you'll see that one property stands out, and it's this particular property at 59 Meadowbrook. The plan actually had determined that this property is actually in a 2-year flood event location, meaning that each year there's a 50% chance of this property flooding, which is just off the charts compared to any other properties in Princeton. I have some photographs here that perhaps Deanna could hand out. showing the property and what occurred in 1999 at the flooding event there. And you'll see the photographs on the first page. There's a photograph showing the high water mark on the garage doors. The garage doors high water mark was about 18 inches above the pavement. Also, as you turn the page, there's photographs of mold actually inside the house that, of course, needed to be remediated. But this was 1999. It's happened a number of times since then. We pulled the records regarding this repetitive flood loss location from FEMA, and their records go back to 1979. In 1979, there were $12,000 paid due to flood losses associated with this property. And then in 1996, numerous payments were made totaling $87,000. In 1999, this was Hurricane Floyd, amount of just under $15,000 was paid. And then 2002, the rainfall events I spoke of earlier that prompted us to really prepare a flood mitigation plan and then work to obtain funding, amount of $17,000 was paid by the federal government. And then in 2005, an amount of $65,000 was paid. And then for Hurricane Irene, an amount of just under $50,000 was paid. So over that 32-year period, amount of almost $250,000 has been paid in federal funds due to damages that have occurred to this property that actually sits very close to a stream, as you can see in the photograph, and is so close that there's a 50% chance of the property flooding every year, and there's no other property like this one here in the community. So we continued, and once the flood mitigation plan was in place, we applied for FEMA funding in 2007, but unfortunately we were denied. And at that point, we went and we met with Rush Holt. We discussed with Congressman Holt the need to obtain funds to acquire this particular property, and we had to wait again for the appropriate timing to apply, and the next time occurred was in 2010. We applied in September 2010, and then finally in January 2012, we were notified that we received a grant award of $664,525 to purchase the property. I've read information, Dale Mead's information that he's provided, and there's some confusion, I guess, regarding the amount of Green Acres funds that would be needed to purchase this property. As Council President Miller had indicated, the purchase price would be $625,000. There would be a total amount of $30,000 in Green Acres funds that would be utilized for this purchase, and that would allow for this 3/4 acre property to become Green Acres, to be open space or a park in the future or whatever. And as you can see by the photographs, it's right along the stream. So that's some history regarding what's gone into working and strategizing and really trying to get to this particular point of acquiring the property. If there's any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Are there any questions from council on Mr. Kaiser's report?
Patrick?
Well, yes. One is there was a resolution that apparently was passed by a township committee along the lines of what we're considering here, and I want to understand what happened with that and why we're considering this now 2 years later.
We're working with the federal government, and the wheels of the federal government turn very slowly. So it takes time to go through that process, numerous meetings and so forth. And so we're finally here after obtaining the appraisals that were required, and they have since been accepted by FEMA, that we're finally at this point ready to acquire the property. I'm a little unclear with that answer. Does that mean that
the process that was started with that resolution always included a purchase like this, and this is just the continuation of that process, or was that process aborted for some reason?
No, that was beginning process, and this is just simply continuation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say, I guess I've been probably, besides Council President, the second person that's been involved in this for over all these years. And I'm 100% on board with the decision to purchase this property and to tear this property down and to set it aside for a park-like setting. You mentioned numbers. The numbers that were mentioned, Bob, $250,000 of federal dollars that have been spent through FEMA, but we didn't mention the safety concerns. We haven't mentioned the other concerns that could deal with life and everything else. This is a dangerous, dangerous property. And I think if you personally, I think also that we didn't mention was that the fact that if we don't do this now, the grant that we are supposed to be receiving will be thrown away, and we'll have no other grant mechanism to fund this purchase. I don't see how this is not a win-win for everyone. We live in a community where we care for each other, and if we don't care for each other, then we have issues. I don't know why this would be not agreed upon by any members of this council or anyone else in regard to the situation that we have here at 59 Meadowbrook. It seems to me that we couldn't ask for a better outcome if we would have wished upon a star. So I'm in 100% full favor, positive favor to make this work. And also I want to thank the engineering department, Bob Kaiser and Deanna Stockton, for working so hard to bring this to us. I mean, this is a terrific way to deal with this. So thank you.
I do have some hesitancy, not for actually the purchase price, but about the purchase price, specifically the $30,000 above FEMA, and I don't want to talk about negotiations. I think that's something that should happen behind closed doors, and I would love the opportunity to discuss this again, but I'm wondering what the timing is. Is it really impossible for us to discuss the negotiations one more time before proceeding? Would we really jeopardize the FEMA money?
With the grant award, the timing is really tight. There's a September 12th deadline, and that September 12th deadline isn't just simply to close on the property, but we need to close. We need to have the asbestos checked, removed from the property. We have to have the house demolished, and then we have to have the site restored by September 12th. So it's a tight time frame to get all of that done.
Thank you. Let me follow up with that. I am concerned that that if we don't adopt this tonight, this window will close, we'll miss this opportunity, and of course we always should be very careful whenever we're spending our own tax dollars, but it seems like for $30,000 we're leveraging a substantial federal grant, and I am concerned, those of us who were previously in the borough, we don't have the same tortured history that those of you have with this property, but it sounds like quite a history, and I'm concerned about our own credibility being on the line. And when I talked to you earlier today, Bob, but I think I want to confirm to make sure I understand, it sounded like the township had reached out to Rush Holt's office and asked for them to lobby FEMA for this grant, and so the township, the township went out on a limb. This was a priority, passed the resolution in 2012, and so it really is the credibility of the town on the line, and if we don't seize this opportunity now, going forward, I'm not sure what kind of reception we get when we go to FEMA. And we don't often get federal grants, especially of this size in Princeton, and so it's a missed opportunity. And of course, as I said, it always is tough when we're spending taxpayer dollars, but I think we also have to consider the federal taxpayer dollars, and it sounded like I think you mentioned almost $200,000 has gone out from, in federal funding to the homeowner. And if we don't, again, if we don't do this now, could continue to be, that money continue to go out. So it's never fun when we're talking about things like this, and sometimes you're thinking about the least bad option. But in this one, I plan to support, because I would be very disappointed if we missed this opportunity to address a matter of fairness and public health for people who live there, and we would lose this federal grant that so many people put so much effort into, and that we asked people on the outside to go out on a limb for us on.
Any further questions or comments from council?
I do have a question to follow up on Ms. Howard's comment. Will this federal money continue to, if there are events at this home, will there continue to be more federal funds? I somehow remember from our conversation that they're tapped out in terms of that $250,000 number growing.
Well, the $250,000 is flood payments that are made. So if the property continues to flood, federal funds would still be available to the tenants and the owners to pay for damage. The difficulty we have is we have health issues associated with the property. Our building department's been very involved there many times, and at times this property's been placarded and so forth. And also we've had tenants come here to governing body meetings expressing concern. What can you do to protect us? We had no idea that we would end up in this type of situation. Regarding the grant that we received, if we don't go ahead and utilize those funds by September 12th and complete our obligations by September 12th, that money goes away. It'll be gone. We can always apply again, but if we're not able to really follow through on this grant, I think my sense is FEMA will look at us and say, well, do we really want to give the money to Princeton? The last time we made an allocation, they weren't able to really close and purchase the property.
Has the landlord let the tenants know that they're in a flood-prone property that they're renting? I mean, I thought I saw that there was an ordinance that they were required to.
There's now an ordinance on the books that requires them to give the information to the tenants that it's in a flood zone.
There is, yes. The ordinance is like 2 years old, though. It's only like 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I think it was done quite recently. But there is an ordinance in place.
But not since before consolidation, at least.
Yeah, right before.
I think several people have referred to the tortured history of this property, and I think I've had the experience of driving by the property after it's been flooded and walking around the property to inspect for myself, the impact of the flooding. And it's quite a shock to see a homeowner's contents out on the lawn, drying out the rugs, the bedding, the sofa, all of the things that are owned by the people who are renting the property out trying to dry it out, and to walk around the house and look at the high water mark being a foot to a foot and a half above the floor level of the house. And I think that part of the tortured history that ought to be kept in mind is that there are people involved in this. There are people who rent the house in good faith and then find themselves out of a place to live as a result of the flooding. And while you might say that's not our problem, it is our problem as a community, because those people come before council, they come to our Human Services Commission, and they ask for help. And we provide them with help in finding a place to live. So I think very often we're faced with a choice, and you look at it and say, what is the least bad or least worst option? And this may be one instance where the least worst option might be to commit a small amount of open space funds to get rid of something that has nagged at the community for a long period of time. With that, I'd like to open it to public comment, unless there are further questions or comments from council. And we'll take public comment and then come back to council again.
Good evening. My name is Dawn Day. I live at 99 Meadowbrook Drive in Princeton. In other words, about 5 houses away from the house that floods. I've been a resident of Princeton for 38 years, so I have lived through many of these human events that have happened. Just to suggest a couple of highlights, an Israeli person lost a book because they'd packed it up, they were ready to leave, and then it flooded, and that was their only copy. You know, maybe that was incautious, but to me it was a tragedy. A young family with an infant was living there and ran scared after the flood. Right now there is a man in a wheelchair who lives in that house, or if he isn't living there right this minute, he has in the last year. He may have moved on, I don't know. People can be hurt by this situation. And I think as a neighbor, that is my main concern. There is, though, the fact that where else can Princeton pay $30,000 and get a pocket park? That's not totally to be sneezed at. So I urge you to, I was a little appalled to learn that all this work has to be done by September 12th to take advantage of this opportunity. I request that the council very seriously consider the human aspects of this and vote in favor of this purchase. Thank you.
Hi, we're Eli and Molly Wasserman from 160 Meadowbrook Drive, a neighbor to the flood house.
So a bunch of kids on our street call that house the flood house because whenever we walk by it on our way to school, a bunch of times we see furniture and carpet spread out on the lawn trying to dry from the last rain that happened and flooded the house.
So like whenever the kids were walking around, neighbors, and if anyone needs directions ever, we always say, oh, it's next to the flood house, near the flood house, because that's what we know it as. Because after the heavy torrential rains, there is no basement like most people's where it floods. It's only the first floor, so that's where all the furniture gets wet with the beds and the carpets and the chairs. And it's just really sad to see when everything is like out of the house because it's all damaged and wet from the rains. So we thought we think it is a good idea to take it down just so it could be a fun recreational place for the kids, and so no one has to go through the process of having to take out all their furniture because they're damaged. Thank you.
A couple of comments. I have no problems at all with your proposal or idea to buy the house and take it down.
Excuse me, could you state your name, please?
My name is Doug Davis. I do have a serious problem with Jenny as to the price you're about to pay. And according to your records down there, if I've read everything correctly, in July of '89, a house, I think it's 107 Meadowbrook, sold for $425,000. I believe the Levids bought this house in December of '89. A few months later, the 107 sold for $425,000. I think the Levids bought this house through auction because it could not be sold because of the flooding for $182,000, which means they bought it for about 50% under the market value of general houses. You have the assessed value of this property at $577,300. Why you want to pay a premium for it is beyond me. I think, Mr. Miller, you've been by the house, you said. I went by it today. I've been by it a lot of times. The roof looks like it's about ready to fall in. It's got beautiful flowers growing out of the rain gutters. It looks like it hasn't been painted in about 20 years. X the water problem, I don't think this house could sell for its assessed value of $577. So while I like the idea, I strongly suggest you reconsider the purchase price.
Good evening, Henry Singer. I echo the gentleman's concerns. I certainly have compassion for those affected by the events of the flooding, but it doesn't seem like the flooding is a question of if, it's when. And I think it's criminal that the community has allowed successive families to live in this home. I'm just not sure that the correct course of action is to pay above market rates to solve the problem. I don't understand, and I don't know the law, and I ask for some guidance in this regard, but why don't we just condemn the property and acquire it? The compassion doesn't get me to the point where I'm willing to pay that extra money. And I have to tell you, $30,000 may be the local amount, but I don't know about you. I write several checks to the taxman, including the federal taxman. We should not take that for granted. You represent the citizens of this town, not just in terms of what they spend locally, but at all levels. And that money's going to come from somewhere. Don't be deceived about that. It's not free money. And I expect you to make the decision with regards to all of the cost, not just the local component of it. So if you can explain to me why we're compelled to do this in the way that you're planning to go forward, if it's in law or whatnot, okay, I'll accept that. But you also have to make the argument for why you're going to pay more than this gentleman suggests it's really worth. I would never pay that kind of money for it, and I don't think what sane person would. Why would we bail out essentially a failed private investment? Thank you.
My name is Jeffrey Orleans, and I live at 107 Meadowbrook. And I'm both a federal and a Princeton and state taxpayer. And I will be glad to write my tax check, as I do every year, to abate this terrible public nuisance. I don't walk by that property only occasionally or only in good weather. I walk by it every single day. I've walked by it after one flood after another. I've seen the stuff of other people's lives that is sitting out there afterwards. I've seen the mold. I've smelled the mold. I've seen the debris that washes out of that house. I've seen how close that house is to the very substantial new culvert and bridge, which the township paid for just a few years ago after a previous storm washed out that roadway. So we have a significant public investment which is immediately downstream of that house and will be impacted by debris the next time that house floods. This house is a significant public nuisance, not only to the people who live in it, but to all of us in the neighborhood who are affected every time it floods and every time there are the potential for vermin in that vacant wet house. There's material that sits out there for weeks if it's a bad enough event that's filled with mold. So I would be glad to pay my share or more than my share of the $30,000 in Princeton funds that it will take to do this. I personally would love to see the price be lower. I don't like to pay, whether it's federal money or township money, I don't like to pay a penny more than we should pay for this. But we don't seem to have that alternative, and I assume that if the township tried to take the property by eminent domain, we would be on the hook for the full cost of whatever that is, not just the $30,000. The $30,000 in open space money is 5% or so of the total price. And FEMA, in its wisdom, has seen fit to award us a grant to get rid of this once and for all, save future federal taxpayers the cost of abating this house, and they will abate this house in the very next storm. And for my situation as a neighbor of that house, to pay only $30,000 to get rid of it once and for all and make that space safe and take that nuisance out of our neighborhood and out of our township is a bargain. The price may be too high altogether. The price to us in Princeton is an absolute bargain. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jim Waltman. I'm the Executive Director of the Stony Brook Millstone Watershed Association. Our mission is to protect and restore clean water in our region. It's about a 265 square mile region. It's centered right here in Princeton, and we have more than 500 members in Princeton. I just wanted to commend the work of Mr. Kaiser, who's been working on this for so many years, and for the council in taking this issue up under consideration. The Watershed Association strongly encourages you to take this action. You know, sometimes you got to spend money you don't want to spend. But I would challenge anybody in this room to find a federal program where the feds will pay 95% and the local match is 5%. I think it's an extraordinarily generous proposition and a very well spent $30,000 for this town. You know, the problem is we are in an era where we're going to see increasing flooding. There is no way around that. Since the turn of the century, we're averaging about 5 inches of rain more than we did in all the historic times before that. So we're going to have more rain. And I hate to say this may not be the last one of these that you have to do in the town, certainly not in the next decades or century. So this is a good, if unfortunate, model. It's the environmentally right thing to do, and it's also the socially responsible thing to do. I want to say there have been some concerns about the funds. The Watershed Association has been involved in a lot of these programs throughout our region and the state. The state has a program like FEMA's. It's called Blue Acres. And I think both programs run on a similar premise. It is kind of a humanitarian approach, frankly, where the properties are looked at their pre-flood value. And you can say, well, that's not right, but that's kind of the humanitarian way of doing this thing. And this is the way the state's been doing it and the feds are doing it. So yeah, you could look at this property and say, oh, it's so flood damaged, we should discount the value we pay. But that's just not the way these programs were set up to run. The last question, I'm also a board member on a state board that runs the Farmland Preservation Program. And I can tell you we've had some real key farms that we were trying to protect for the benefit of the people of the state, and we had to go through condemnation occasionally. And it's been suggested maybe that's a better approach here. Condemnation is a legal process. So yeah, you could go down that road, but I bet you'd pay more than $30,000 in legal fees to exercise a condemnation option. So again, this is unfortunate that the town has to do this, but I would strongly encourage you to take this step, purchase this property with the considerable federal match, take down this house, and create a little pocket park in an area that'll do a better job handling that roaring, little bitty roaring stream for years to come. So thank you very much.
My name's Victoria Bell, and I live at 141 Meadowbrook Drive, and I'd just like to state there's a clear misunderstanding between the landlords and the renters that were there, because even if it is written into the lease, as was suggested in a 2009 some sort of ordinance or some sort of where they have to tell the renters do not understand that it floods immediately when the stream fills up. This house is within the stream, the second height of the stream, so it happens immediately. So it's important to understand that renters are being abused with this house, and it's important that we as a community need to stop that. And we as a community can't sit back any longer and be neighbors of people that are being abused. And every time that we walk past someone, we think they have been told. And then when we see them afterwards, we realized they did not understand. This cannot go on any longer. We must say yes. We must take this house down. People are being abused, including the children. Yes, it may be a misunderstanding between the landlords and the renters. I'm sure the landlords don't mean to abuse people, but this misunderstanding is causing abuse. Please take this house down. It is necessary. Thank you.
My name is Dale Mead. I live at 48 Oakland Street. I've lived there for the past 42 years, and for 42 years I've been battling flooded basements, water in my backyard from surface runoff, and I'm not the only one on our street or in this town that is dealing with water. Yes, 59 Meadowbrook is an extreme case of the effect of surface water runoff, but it's not the only one. And so I think let us not get emotional about how we deal with this case. Let us think about all the other cases we have to deal with as well as this one. I sympathize with the neighbors who believe that this is an eyesore in their neighborhood and is potentially a safety hazard. However, I am very concerned about the price that has been suggested of $625,000. I believe that is far too high for this property. The beneficiary of this particular action is not going to be the people, the tenants who were flooded out and had to drive their goods on the driveways and sidewalk like many other people in town did during these recent floods. But the beneficiary of this action is going to be the landlord. And so I think that let's carefully assess what the true market value of this property is. And for example, a previous speaker mentioned that it's the pre-flood condition value that counts. Well, that's not the way Matthew Bryant of New Jersey Office of Emergency Management, who's been working with this particular grant, he wants to see appraisals, market value, that were considered post-event and in damaged as-is condition. And so the price that we're talking about for this property is the true market value as is. And previous speakers indicated a little bit of the history, but let me go through that again. The property was purchased by the current owner in December 1989, $182,000. Known to be flood prone, known to have had a history prior to that of health or flood insurance claims. The property was assessed at $184,000 until the assessment and the revaluation in 2010. In 2010, the assessment jumped up to $577,300. The homeowner objected to that and argued, and I agree with his line of argument, that the true market value of that house at that time in 2010, he argued, was $280,000. It had to do with the ratio of the prior assessment to the new assessment based on comparable properties in the neighborhood. Well, if you look at the four adjacent properties, 47 Meadowbrook, 60 Meadowbrook, 121 Brayburn, and 160 Leabrook, and you look and see how much their assessment was increased as a result of the revaluation, it was a factor of 2.00 on average. So if you take the previous assessment of $184,000, multiply it by 2, the value in 2010 should have been $368,000. So that's based on the argument actually the owner themselves made in a letter that is in the assessor's records. So in this latest go-round, and I asked earlier about, what happened to the 2012 resolution, and yes, I discovered as I was reading this more carefully this afternoon, this is the same resolution that started in 2012 and way back, as Bob said. But the issue here is, what is the true market value of this property? And so 3 appraisals were obtained. In 2012, the township obtained an appraisal for $595,000. That appraisal, and you know how appraisals go, you make adjustments, you compare with comparables. All the other comparables that this property was compared with did not have a flooding condition, and no adjustment was made for reducing the value due to flooding. That was followed in September 2013 by an appraiser for the property owners. That came in at $660,000. And do you think anybody is going to pay $660,000 for that property? I don't think so. That property appraisal did not include any comment about flooding or adjustment in value for adverse flood conditions. In addition, the living area was overestimated by about 25 to 30%.